Hi, Nat Doig here. Now, I have some very important news about future episodes of Weird in the Wade. You'll hear the news towards the end of this episode. I just wanted to give you a heads up so that you don't miss it. There'll also be a wee update on this year's Burryman parade, as well as a beautiful piece of music composed by a listener inspired by the Burryman episode. I promise you, you will not want to miss that at the end of today's show. Today's episode also includes descriptions of a battle scene. Welcome to Weird in the Wade. A podcast about all that's weird, wonderful, and a little off kilter in the town of Biggleswade, in Bedfordshire, and its surrounding area. Whether it's tales of phantom fighting men, the Potton Road poltergeist, haunting hounds, or the devil's toenail that you're after, or maybe a graveyard ghast, or eccentric character. Criminal conspiracies, or the Great Swan Mystery of 1935, which, yes, I promise I will tell you one of these days. Weird in the Wade will have something for you. The stories may be local, but they're never parochial, and will speak to you today, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Weird in the Wade. Poynton, the Fens in South Lincolnshire, sometime in the early 13th century. A fireside in a small but neat house, and on a makeshift bed in front of the fire lies Edith, the teenage daughter of the local blacksmith and his wife. Edith has been unwell now for some days. She has a fever which will not break. One moment she is shaking with cold, the next throwing off her blankets, drenched in sweat. Her skin is bone grey. Her head thumps like her father's anvil is striking at her skull relentlessly. Sometimes she sleeps, but mostly she lies awake, staring into the fire, seemingly unaware of her surroundings. This usually chatty girl has not uttered a word for 2 days. The wise woman Agnes is sent for. She is skilled with healing herbs. She instructs the family on the making of tinctures and poultices which attempt to draw the fever and the ague out of the young woman. Poppy seed tea is the only medicine which eases Edith's headache, but Agnes is wary of using it too freely. Agnes is used to sufferers of the ague. You can't live in the Fens without being aware of its dangers, but also the dangers of becoming too reliant on the poppy. It's on the 3rd night of her illness that Edith takes a turn, but not for the worst, just something different. Edith has slept fitfully, and she awakes to a still and quiet house. She hears her father snores and sees that her mother is asleep on a heap of blankets at her side. Edith's head is still splitting, but something else is stirring. She feels like she is slipping backwards into her blankets and makeshift bed. Then she hears a crack, and she is no longer by the hearth, but in the middle of tumult and trouble. There are people all around her, screaming, crying, roaring with pain and fear, like nothing she has ever experienced. She gasps. Her breaths are hard to take. Her chest feels like it's collapsing in on her. She is terrified. These are warriors who are surrounding her fighting. There are blades gleaming, axes and short daggers. Arrows are swooping through the air, but none touch her. Then she realises that she can see herself, like she is watching a play that she is acting in. Another her is on stage, and she is just the bystander. And remember, today we are used to seeing ourselves in photographs and on film, to see ourselves outside of our bodies as such. For Edith, other than her reflection in a basic mirror or reflective surface of some kind, would be impossible. The other Edith is raised above the fighting on a funeral bier. She is convinced that she must be dead. To view herself like this can only mean she is in spirit, surely. Sweet grasses and flowers and herbs surround her on that bier, like they will at her funeral. The bier this other Edith lies on is raised above an ancient burial mound, a gentle sloping bowl of a hill on the wider, steeper hillside. From her vantage point, she knows where she is and recognises it exactly. She is on the field, the hillside which links her home of Poynton to Sempringham. That one and only point where you can look down onto Poynton, but also over to the abbey at Sempringham. It's a wide open space, a field for sheep grazing, a windswept and desolate spot. She has never seen it thronged with bodies, fighting like this before. She sees that both men and women are battling beside her. There is mud and blood and tears strewn across their faces. Some are alive with dread, with anger and spite. Others are dead or dying, eyes huge and dark or rolled back into their skulls. Edith feels a wave of nausea rush through her, but she is not sick. Edith is convinced that those who are still alive fighting around her do not actually see her, nor the other Edith on the funeral bier. But she then senses at her side a person. It is her father. He is dressed in his blacksmith apron. His gloves, his dark hair is plastered to his head, like it is when he is busy working in the forge. She calls out to him,
"Dad! Dad!"
But he does not respond. She watches as another man approaches. He is not fighting, but appears to be from one of the armies. He is old, with long silver hair, though the sides are shaved in a strange way. He also has a long beard, with beads in it. He is pale, but his eyes are a deep blue, and they are kind.
"Have you not gone to the tomb of St. Gilbert?" "I should try that if I were you. St. Gilbert has been known to heal many."
Edith's father immediately heeds the stranger's words. He scoops up his daughter, the other Edith, who is on the bier, into his arms, and he runs with her through the fighting and the death towards Sempringham. Edith realises that her doppelganger is alive. She follows her father, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. At the gate of the abbey, they stop, and there they meet another old man. This one is in a monk's habit. He has short, steely grey hair and a weather-worn face, a bulging nose and watery eyes. He rebukes Edith's father.
"Call yourself a father? You took your time. You almost let your daughter die when you could so easily have saved her. Is that so much trouble for you, to bring her here to the tomb of St. Gilbert? You'd rather she perish than make this little effort?"
Edith watches as the other version of her escapes her father's arms. Like she's liquid, she just slips onto the ground. On her hands and knees, this other Edith crawls towards St. Gilbert's grave. When eventually she reaches it, she lies along the tomb, her arms outstretched, and then the Edith who was watching this wakes. It was morning, and her mother was stirring. Edith, for the first time in 3 days, spoke.
Mum, I was not here. I was on the field. There was fighting and death, and I need to go to St. Gilbert's tomb, Mum, now."
Eventually, after many questions, Edith was able to tell the tale of her vision, how real it had seemed, not like a dream. And she explained to her mother.
"I could taste the blood and mud from the battle. I could smell the sweat on the bodies of those who fought. I felt the cold stone tomb of St. Gilbert's against my skin, even though I was watching the other Edith lie on it. I could feel the grave's coolness, I felt so much better. I felt like I was healed. Please, Mum, you must believe me. I will only recover if you could take me to St. Gilbert's tomb and measure me there.
Edith's mother nodded and quickly went to consult with her husband and Agnes the healer. The blacksmith was unsure, though the rebuke he'd received in the vision his daughter described troubled him, but he was still wary. Agnes was more forthright.
Measuring the sick has been known to work for some, and St. Gilbert's blessing seems to be upon your girl. What harm can it do to take her there? It's not far, and I will help you. I know some of the sisters there, and they are good, kind women who I'm sure will help.
And so Edith was brought to the tomb of St. Gilbert, and she lay alongside the grave, and a length of yarn was measured out, as was sometimes the custom in healing rituals. Within hours of this visit, Edith's fever had broken. She was hungry and keen to eat, and she then slept deeply for many hours, and on waking, her only symptom was the headache, which would not abate. After another day of thumping, piercing pain in her head, Agnes the healer called for the yarn which they'd used to measure Edith at St. Gilbert's tomb. It was wrapped around Edith's head, and as Edith held her breath and then took 2 deep breaths in and out, she felt the pain within her head slip and fade, and then eventually disappear. Only then was the yarn untied, and Edith was declared healed. Another miracle performed by St. Gilbert, the only Englishman to found a monastic order. Hello and welcome to Weird in the Wade. I'm Nat Doig, and today we are still on a summer wander, making our way back to the Wade. We're much closer to home, though, than we were in Scotland, and today's episode is set in a landscape which is very similar to that of East Bedfordshire. We're in the Lincolnshire Fens. A flat, relentless landscape of dykes and ditches, fields of crops as far as the eye can see, big skies overhead filled with birds, and nowadays fighter jets. A place which was once more water than land, and land which has been reclaimed from the sea, yet somehow the people and the places have not forgotten the centuries of bogginess, of treacherous marshes and oozing peaty pools, the swaying sedges and reeds that hide secretive creatures, feathered or furred, which dwell there still. It's a slow place, where time seems to roll around in a way that feels unchanged and untouched. It's also where a big chunk of my family now lives. And it's thanks to Dr. Francis Young, again, that I have this story to tell you. When he shared with me the extract from Kevin Hart's book on fairies about the Biggleswade Phantom Army, there was a sentence or two below it that caught my eye. It was the tale I have just told you of the gravely sick girl from Poynton who had a vision of fighting armies and was healed at St. Gilbert's grave at Sempringham. It caught my eye because I visited Sempringham with my mum not that long ago. I also knew that it was a favourite running route of my brother's. I was intrigued for many reasons, not least that this vision was included in a book about fairy sightings from the medieval times. Surely this was just a case of a young girl having a feverish hallucination or delirium, but I wanted to find out more. I started first by asking my brother if he knew of any stories about Poynton or Sempringham. I'd done a search online and I'd really found nothing. Now, I didn't tell Chris, my brother, why at first I was asking, and he assumed it was a simple ghost story that I was researching. When I told him, though, that it was a vision of a battle on a hillside where you can see both Poynton and Sempringham at the same time, he became very interested indeed. He said that there was only one place where you could do that, see both places at once, and he knew this hillside very well indeed. And so he decided to take me there to have a look for myself. It was a blustery day in April. We managed to miss any of the showers, but the wind was blowing mightily as we set out to walk part of Chris's regular running route around Sempringham. You probably won't be surprised to hear our topic of conversation here. Oh, that's what I meant to tell you. Do you know that one of the first sort of publicised sightings of a UFO was over Gosberton. 1954, it was a silver saucer shape with white lights coming out of it, and it was seen over Gosberton, so I'll send you the stuff about it.
Today, the abbey at Sempringham has long gone, but the church remains, along with a holy well and a commemoration stone for a Welsh princess. More on those later. A hill in the fens is a rare thing, and you do feel like you're on the edge of the world whilst you're walking there, with the vast flat plain of South Holland to one side and Casteven spread out on the other. It turned out that the reason Chris was interested in this story and wanted to take me there was because it was one part of the running route which he really did not like.
And as you can probably hear from the wind, we're now probably at the highest point, almost at the brow, where the ghostly battle, took place.
Once I get down that side, I never feel nervous.
No,
It's only
this bit.
over here or over there where round up and down.
I thought I just saw something then go running across, but you would have seen it. I think it must have been a bird. It was like grey.
Yeah. So going up those hills and everywhere else, I never get nervous. It's only
No.
this little bit where it's like I had that fall once and then I
did-
get that fall.
Oh, look at the big crack here in the ground.
Back in the safety and warmth of the car, Chris told me about his experiences on that hillside.
So I'm here in the car now after our walk around the site at Sempringham and Poynton with my brother Chris, who you will have heard as we were walking. And I'm just going to ask him a few questions about this area. So how often do you run here, Chris?
Normally about once a week I'll come for a run here.
Okay, and how long have you been coming here for a run?
Probably the last 5 years.
Okay, so quite often then.
Yeah.
You come here a lot. And you do a 3.5 mile circuit usually, don't you?
Yeah,
We just did a mile
Yeah,
today.
it's a 3.5 sort of trail run up and down the hills, around the fields.
And have you ever had any kind of strange feelings or experiences while you've been running here?
In one certain area, so on the loop back and you get to the top of the brow of the hill between sort of Sempringham and Poynton, it feels pretty strange up there, as if like, because it's quite a large hill, when you're at the top, it's like I've had thoughts of, well, what happens if the ground opens up? So it's a bit weird running over that bit. I tend to run a little bit faster. The other areas, no feeling, but that point there, feeling, it's like, feel like the ground's going to open up, which is strange and odd.
Yeah, it is. But I can understand it now, having walked it with you. It's very exposed, but the other hill you run on is equally exposed, isn't it?
Yeah, so at the start of the run, when you go the first hill up is probably more exposed. So you run to the top of that hill, you can see really nice scenery around, very exposed and windy. Yeah, no feelings up that hill. It's just that certain section where you loop round.
It is just a short section, and you've got Poynton on one side of you. So if you're facing Sempringham, Poynton's behind you, and you can see Poynton and you can see Sempringham, the church.
Yeah.
Which is where the priory was. There were a lot of larks singing when we were there, but I have to say, it did feel a bit strange. Are you prone to having these kind of strange feelings?
Not really.
And I as Chris's sister, I can say, no, I was surprised when you told me about this, because it's not the kind of thing that Chris normally would say. I know you're interested in the similar things to me. We've always been interested in UFOs and ghosts and stuff, but we didn't really experience much as children, did we?
No, not at all.
No, so it's like I was a little bit surprised. What did you think when I told you then that bit that you find a little strange is where a girl had a vision of a battle taking place?
Well, I was shocked. And then after you said it, I thought I'll try and do a bit of research, tried to look, can't find anything online about it. Spoke to some people who lived in Poynton for a number of years. Probably they've lived there probably about 20 years and they didn't even know about it.
No, I mean, and it is from a very academic and obscure book, and I am going to find out what the source is for it. Yeah, it's a really interesting story. And there seem to be a few of them around the country of these ghostly battles, or even battles of sort of the fae folk taking place, which is why I thought it was interesting about you saying that feeling of the ground opening up, because so many stories about the fae battles, you know, where it's fairies or elves fighting each other, there's always this idea of them living in a hill.
Yeah.
But we haven't found yet any kind of association with there. We know there was a Viking battle at Sempringham, wasn't there?
Yeah, just up the road.
Yeah.
The Three Kings.
So there could well have been skirmishes all across this area at various times, you know. And it was a very strategic point we were saying, wasn't it? If you were going to have a battle here, you'd either run down that hill to attack people in Poynton, or you would battle on that hill because of the vantage point. But there's a holy well here as well at this site, which is ancient, so that will go from before Christian times. And of course we've got the story of Gilbert as well that we'll look into and see if we can find any clues. But yeah, we're going to keep digging, and I'm going to speak with Francis and see what he knows. Really looking forward to finding out more about Sempringham.
Yeah, it's a lovely place.
It is.
Yeah.
It's lovely. It's don't be frightened, anyone who might want to come here. It is beautiful, and it didn't feel so much as frightening on that hill. It just felt a little bit uncanny.
Yeah, odd.
You know, odd. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Chris. That was really great fun.
Yeah, thank you.
It is a strange, or odd, as Chris says, place, this field between Poynton and Sempringham. It's not the most exposed hillside there either. Yet that hillside, the one that is more exposed, with raging winds, feels far less strange and eerie. And once you reach the brow of the spooky hill, let's call it, and you're surrounded by hedgerow, it suddenly feels different again. We're now only a few metres away from where it was really windy on the sort of brow of the hill, and we've got hedgerow, and it just feels a lot cosier. After talking with Chris and visiting the site, I was left with a strange and inexplicable feeling about that hillside, the hillside that featured in the young girl's vision. I obviously embellished my retelling of the story, giving the girl a name, fleshing out her parents and adding a healing advisor. But as Francis explains, the story as it appeared at the time really is a curious one.
She has a vision of herself lying dead on a bier on top of a burial mound.
Of course.
And burial mounds, of course, are intimately associated with fairies. And another thing that's associated with fairies is the idea of the fairy double. So you're going to have this doppelganger experience where you meet yourself. And this is a doppelganger experience. So I think there could be a link there. And then she reports that she hears the sounds of battle around her, as if she's in the middle of a battle. And so one way you could interpret that, and perhaps the way that the medieval chronicler might have interpreted, is that this is kind of a spiritual metaphor, sort of her soul is being fought for by demons or angels or fae or whatever, otherworlders.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, it's hard to say definitely that there's fairy elements to this, but there are hints that you can pick up on.
There were great cracks in the ground on that hillside when Chris and I walked there. If you told me that otherworlders lived beneath that hill, I'd not disbelieve you. Hills, especially in places where they are rare to find, have always attracted stories of the fae and otherworlders. And saying that, hills in even really hilly places still attract these stories. There are so many tales across the British Isles, and especially in Wales and Scotland, where unwary youngsters wander into an opening in a hill only to find themselves transported to another world, a place of the fae folk, the fairies and elves, the supernatural beings who live alongside us in the shadows, usually out of sight. Of course, when these humans emerge from the hill, time has sped by without them. My absolute favourite recounting of this tale was by an Inverness taxi driver who told me it as if it were true and had only happened last week. 2 bewildered lads, he claimed, speaking medieval Gaelic, had been picked up by the police on the Black Bridge, according to the taxi driver. These teens were shaking and traumatised. The slightest noise from a car or bus sent them gibbering with fear. No one could understand them. But when a professor proficient in Old Gaelic was found, the lads told a tale of being invited into the hill for a feast, the finest feast they had ever had. And in the lads' reckoning, they had only been gone a day or 2 at this feast. Yet centuries had passed outside the fairy kingdom. So when they left the hill, they were terrified at what they found in modern Inverness. Interestingly, there is now a cemetery on that hill in Inverness, and it is still known as a fairy hill. I'm not aware of any such stories being associated with the hill at Sempringham, only this medieval fever vision by this nameless girl from Poynton, told in a book chronicling the miracles of St Gilbert during his life and after his death. I do not even know when this vision was had by the young girl. It was certainly after Gilbert's death and after he was canonised. Incidentally, Gilbert was made a saint in 1202 and was the first saint whose canonisation went through a rigorous process of gathering and presenting evidence, a process that pretty much exists today. Delegates from England journeyed to Rome to persuade the Pope that Gilbert was worthy of sainthood. Yet most of us today will have never heard of St Gilbert of Sempringham. I asked Francis about Gilbert's life and legacy. I was particularly interested as I had read that Gilbert was disabled in some way. Sometimes he was described in the old-fashioned language of the time as being disfigured, and sometimes just referred to as being infirm.
Yeah, we don't know a huge amount about him. I think what he's best known for is the fact that he founded the only religious order that was native to England in the Middle Ages. So, most religious orders were founded outside of Britain, and then, they would eventually come here and they would establish monasteries. But he actually did it himself. He founded his own religious order, which is extraordinary. I mean, he's born in about 1085, son of Anglo-Norman aristocracy, so not all that long after the Norman conquest. And his father is the seigneur, the lord of the manor of Sempringham. And originally, Gilbert is not expected to succeed. And possibly because he has this disfigurement, although it's not really specified what this is, he is encouraged to enter the church, because sometimes if a son was considered to be not fit enough to enter military service, he wouldn't normally be expected to, train to be a knight and, inherit the estate and do the normal things. And so he's sent off to the church. He becomes quite a senior cleric in the Diocese of Lincoln, but refuses to become archdeacon, says that, that's the way to hell, to become an archdeacon. And so he ends up actually going back to his father's estate and becoming the vicar of Sempringham. But then a group of women are really interested in entering the religious life. And at this point, this is now the sort of early 12th century. And the 12th century, the order that was really kind of taking off at that point is the Cistercians, who are really austere, strict Benedictine, organized centrally from the monastery of Citeaux in France. And these women want to be Cistercian nuns. Gilbert writes to the abbot of Citeaux and says, can I arrange this? Can we set up a Cistercian nunnery? They're not interested. And so I think it's really interesting. Gilbert's attitude to women is quite unusual for the time. He decides, right, not only am I going to set up my own monastery, because by this time he's also lord of the manor. He's inherited, I think his eldest brother died, and so he's inherited from his father. He's simultaneously vicar and lord of the manor. So he has complete control of that estate at Sempringham. He's got funds at his disposal. Not only am I going to set up a nunnery for you, but I'm actually going to found a religious order specifically for you that will include both men and women. Now, that was highly unusual at the time. In the Anglo-Saxon period, there had been monasteries that were double monasteries of men and women. But as a result of reforms in the 10th century, there'd been a real crackdown on the idea of men and women living in the same community. That was considered improper. And so it kind of harks back really to a much older form of English religious life, having a double monastery. And all Gilbertine monasteries, as they became known, were always double monasteries like this. They would have both canons, male canons, and female canonesses or nuns in them. And so he founds this monastery. It's quite successful. And yeah, he ends up founding about 26 different priories. And yeah, the Gilbertines they're not a major religious order, but they are quite significant in England. But they don't survive the Reformation, mainly because they don't have any continental connections. And so they kind of can't carry on outside of England after the Reformation. But yeah, he has a shrine at Sempringham and also a holy well. It's always interesting when a saint has a holy well, because it's often the case that those holy wells are actually a lot older and they become associated with the saint after sort of the canonization. But yeah, the idea of saints delivering people from fairies, this is something we come across quite a few times in the Chronicles. And in fact, in Jeremy Hart's book, a lot of the accounts are taken from hagiographies, from these kind of stories about saints and the miracles that they did after their deaths.
I'll link on the blog to some further reading about Gilbert and his life. I love the fact that he was the underdog, the son packed off to the church who became both successful and devout. He is supposed to have lived to be over 100. Avoiding life as a knight certainly served him well. He was lucky to have been born into such a wealthy family as well. His inclusion of women in his religious order is another reason to warm to him. Some speculate that it was due to his closeness to his mother that he respected women so much, and that this closeness to his mother was because of his disability and/or childhood illnesses. And what of the well and the Welsh princess, you might be asking? The well at Sempringham is known as a holy well, and holy wells were often ancient, pre-Christian springs, which had been focal points for the community for centuries, dating back to pre-Roman times in some cases. The local clergy Christianised these wells to make them respectable through associating them with saints. Some of you may have seen a video that I posted back in April from Thomas Becket's well in Northampton. I'll post it again on the blog so that you can see it if you missed it. This well in Northampton existed before Christianity came to Britain. It may have been associated with a local deity or supernatural being, or just considered special for its healing properties. The well in Northampton became associated with Thomas Becket, or a Becket if you prefer, after it was said that Thomas had stopped there to drink on his route into exile after angering King Henry II at Northampton Castle. Interestingly, Gilbert supported Thomas Becket and nearly got into serious trouble for this, being summoned to Westminster to make an account of his support. Luckily, King Henry was distracted at the time and Gilbert was able to head home without being questioned. So it's highly likely that the spring at Sempringham was once a pagan or pre-Christian focal point for locals, either a place where it was seen as special, otherworldly, or maybe even the abode of supernatural beings. Maybe the Romans also co-opted the well and tied it to one of their many gods. But once Gilbert was a saint, the well became associated with him. On my visit in April with my brother, the well was in a sorry state, dried up with rubbish caught up in it. I'll be returning to Sempringham in August before this episode goes out, and so do check social media and the show blog, because I will share pictures and hopefully the well will be looking a lot better by then. But I'm not holding out much hope with the dry summer that we've had. And just a reminder, the blog is weirdinthewade.blog. But what of the story of the Welsh princess? I hope to persuade the wonderful Welsh storyteller Owen Staton to tell this tale properly for us in the future. The short version is this. Princess Gwenllian was born in 1282, some 80 years after St Gilbert's time. She was the daughter of the Prince of Gwynedd and the great-granddaughter of King John of England on her mother's side. And as such, she posed a threat to the English monarch, Edward I, and he sent an army to North Wales not long after her birth. Her father was killed, but under her uncle's guardianship, the infant Gwenllian escaped. only to be captured by the king's men around the time of her first birthday. She was sent to Sempringham, where she spent the rest of her life. Princess Gwenllian died just a few short weeks of her 55th birthday, having never left the convent at Sempringham. It is likely that she did not remember the Welsh that she learnt as a toddler, nor knew the correct pronunciation of her own name. And we English wonder why the other British nations never support us in the football. It is a sad story where a greedy king imprisons not just Gwenllian but others of her kin just in case they inspired their own countryfolk to rise up and challenge his authority. I wonder what Gwenllian's life was like in the convent on that desolate hillside. I hope there was warmth and companionship for her and the other women there. But back to the story of the vision. Is that all we really have? A story of a poorly girl, a fever vision and a miraculous healing which bolsters Gilbert's reputation? Or was something else going on? There are some similarities to the Phantom Army story from Biggleswade. Why was an army fighting around this young girl? Surely it would have been more straightforward if the vision had just been to take her to the tomb. And is there something inherently creepy or uncanny about that hillside? In medieval times, when the land to the east of Sempringham had not been drained, Sempringham would have appeared more like an island to the locals and travellers in that area, a beacon, more than a landmark, a place of safety. Look at the map today, and from the east of Sempringham, the land is crisscrossed by waterways, the fens, which have drained the land of most of its bogginess. It was a landscape that the Romans found difficult to tame. Later, it was a landscape the Vikings used to their advantage. They settled Lincolnshire early on in their rampage across Britain, and just up the road from Sempringham, at the village of Threckingham, there was supposedly a great Viking battle. Now, the legend of the Vikings at Threckingham is a romantic one, and much of it, sadly, has now been proved untrue. Within the church at Threckingham, there are 3 plain tombs, narrow, a bit like upside-down troughs, and the legend goes that these tombs are of 3 Viking kings who were slaughtered by the Saxons at Threckingham at the Battle of Stow in 870. These kings were then buried hurriedly, and they gave the village its name, Three King Ham, pronounced by the locals Threckingham. Sadly, the tombs are 14th century, and it seems that geographically it is unlikely that the battle happened in Threckingham. There has been no evidence found. Even linguists have poured cold water over the etymology of the curious name of Threckingham. All this misinformation or fake news was generated in a chronicle from Crowland, although it was often pronounced Croyland, Abbey. Crowland Abbey is not too far away from Sempringham, and the two establishments did have close links. Crowland has a number of chronicles associated with it, but the one in question here was supposed to have been written by a monk in the 12th and 13th centuries, named Ingulf. Now historians think that these extracts about the Vikings and Threckingham were faked by a much later author in the 15th century. Yet the story of the Vikings at Threckingham persists, possibly because it is such a great story, and the chronicler put a lot of detail into it, including the names of who were killed and who fought, and the battle itself. In 2023, I attended the Great Heathen Army Viking celebration at Threckingham, where Saxons and Vikings fought once more. It was a fantastic spectacle, not just the battling, but there was early medieval music and musical instruments, weaving and spinning demonstrations, pottery, and much, much more. I did feel like I was wandering around an RPG like The Witcher, or the set of a TV series like Game of Thrones at times. And Ingolf's stories are so detailed, it makes you wonder how they made them up. I'll link to a blog which has a translation of the part concerning Threckingham, and you'll see what I mean. It's really convincing. although archaeological evidence for Vikings fighting and dying at Threckingham has not been found, we know that the Vikings were travelling through and settling in the area. They were coming up against opposition from local Saxons, so there must have been battles and skirmishes all around that area from time to time, and many scholars do believe there was a battle near Threckingham in 870, just not at Threckingham itself. Why investigate these Viking battle rumours though? Well, it's purely because of that link to the Biggleswade battle story. These are both places where Vikings were known to inhabit. The Fens are another part of the country where Vikings and Saxons clashed. Although in the 13th century, accurate memory of these battles may not have lasted outside of the monastery's historians and chroniclers, but you never know. Maybe there was some folk memory that lived on, that once upon a time these hillsides had been the scenes of fighting, and so a sick girl might just have had a vision of this. If we want to be wild with our speculation, was the young girl experiencing a time slip and seeing into the past? Or was it, as the medieval chroniclers thought, that this battle was some kind of fight for her soul by good beings and bad, angels and demons? Interestingly, the only time that I have fully hallucinated was when I was 16 and I had chickenpox. My temperature was so high that I hallucinated that the chickenpox spots on my body were in fact soldiers and their camps in the desert. A war was being fought on my skin. It was terrifying. Now, my bout of chickenpox coincided with the First Gulf War starting, and it seemed at the time to be on the television 24/7, and that was quite a new thing for us, particularly in the UK, to have rolling news on sort of permanently telling you about the battles that were happening in the Gulf. But maybe the idea of battles and fighting is one that feverish brains can easily relate to when you're struggling with illness. In my most recent COVID infection, I was also feverish, again, for over 2 days. Luckily, my temperature was not as high as it was when I was 16. And this time, I kind of half dreamt, half hallucinated, that birds were flocking around me and pecking away my disease. It wasn't quite the hallucination from when I was 16, but it was still very, very strange. And it did make me wonder about some of these common visions that people have had over the ages, seeing battling armies, flocks of birds or insects, shadowy people at your bedside, long deceased loved ones returning to you when you are unwell. Are these just figments of a feverish mind, or is the veil thinner when we are ill? Whether truly supernatural or just our natural minds conjuring these visions for us, they are pretty amazing. We might never know why my brother and I found that piece of hillside so odd and uncanny. I had definitely been primed, my brother hadn't, nor why the young woman who was sick saw what she did. But I definitely recommend a visit to the Fens and to Sempringham to experience this wild and windswept landscape which conjures stories and folk tales by the dozen. Now, at the start of the show, I promised you some important news, and I have that news for you now. There is good news and, I suppose, bad news, I'm afraid. So let's get the bad news out of the way first. I'm going to be taking a short break during September, so I'm really sorry there won't be a Weird in the Wade episode released next month. But the good news is that when Weird in the Wade returns in October, in time for Halloween, it will be a fortnightly podcast. Yes, you won't have to wait as long between episodes. I plan to release an episode every 2 weeks from October until July every year, taking a short summer break. And this means that I can make sure that you get more episodes of Weird in the Wade. I'll be moving from 12 episodes a year to nearer 20. So I think it's probably good news, really. I want to make sure that the episodes I make of Weird in the Wade are still of the quality that you've come to expect and enjoy. So thank you for your patience over the next few weeks before Weird in the Wade returns in October. And make sure that you are subscribed to Weird in the Wade. Then you won't miss the show's return just before Halloween. You can also set notifications on many of the podcast apps so that you'll be notified when a new episode arrives. Another good tip is if you follow Weird in the Wade on social media, you'll be kept up to date with everything that's happening between now and Weird in the Wade's return just before Halloween. I am so looking forward to bringing you episodes every 2 weeks from October. And when we return, do I have an episode for you? I'm currently investigating haunting phenomena, which is happening right now in a house in Biggleswade. And yes, the person affected by this haunting does not believe in ghosts. I am so excited for you to meet Andy and his little dog Dolly and their possibly haunted house. But hang on, I've got even more news for you. On Sunday, the 2nd of November, I will be recording a live episode of Weird in the Wade in Biggleswade. Find out more about this live recording on the show blog, weirdinthewade.blog. And I have even more news. Yes, Weird in the Wade has been nominated for a British Podcast Award again in the history category. I am thrilled and delighted. That category is voted for by a panel of judges, but you still have time to vote for your favourite podcast in the Listener's Choice Award. Voting ends on the 8th of September 2025. I'll share a link on the blog if you fancy voting for Weird in the Wade or any other favourite podcasts. And finally, the Burryman. On Friday, the 8th of August, I joined the Burryman as he stomped around the streets of Queensferry once again. It was both joyous and a day of reflection. I was up by 5:30 a.m. and at the train station by 6:30. It was a beautiful, clear morning, and by chance, 3 of the Burryman's team arrived at Delmenny train station at the same time that I did. So I had company for my walk down to the Stag's Head Inn, where the Burryman is dressed. The dressing of the Burryman was a fantastic experience. First, there was the warmth of many reconnections and greetings, the catching up on the last year. It made it feel more like a Christmas gathering or a New Year celebration. After the legendary breakfast rolls, which were fantastic, the Burryman was dressed in his burrs. He is literally sewn into his suit before the burrs are attached. It was really compelling seeing how Andrew transformed into the Burryman. It wasn't until the balaclava was on his head and the burrs attached that he fully transformed. There were a handful of Biggleswade burrs on his costume as well, which I hope bring our small town some luck this year. The procession was as lovely as last year's, though the crowds felt slightly smaller in the morning. And we wondered if Oasis, who were playing Edinburgh that night, had drawn some of the crowd away. But saying that, the high street was thronged with people for the last 2 hours of the Burryman's wander. And a shout out here to a listener from Norway who came up to say hi whilst we walked the last mile with the Burryman. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I walked 9 miles that day and my bones ached, but it was nothing compared to the efforts of the Burryman and his attendants. The relief when Andrew was cut out of his Burryman suit was infectious. His suit discarded like a second skin, shed for the newly cleansed town, made an eerie photograph, which you can see on the show blog, weirdinthewade.blog. I do intend to return next year. I'm afraid the Burryman's burrs do get under your skin, if you let them, and I have been well and truly hooked. One of the things that I really love about making Weird in the Wade is the creativity that it inspires in others, whether it's listeners sharing their stories, photographs, making their own podcasts even, or composing music. I really love sharing your creations with the world. And Ollie Campbell got in touch with me after listening to the Burryman episode to share this beautiful song that he has written about the Burryman, which I'm going to play for you now. Mon the Burryman by Ollie Campbell.
Wash my sins and keep them in Mon the Burryman. Here's a drum, Mon the Burryman. Have a drum. Give us sunshine and give us rain. Tell the crops to grow again. Mon the Burryman. Here's a drum, Mon the Burryman. Here's a drum. Bear me a son or a May Queen. Make her the fairest that we've ever seen. Mon the Burryman. Here's a drum, Mon the Burryman. Drink a drum. Mon the Burryman. Here's a drum, Mon the Burryman. Drink a drum.
Thank you for listening to Weird in the Wade. I really appreciate your company as I tell these weird and wonderful tales. I'd like to thank my brother Chris for taking me to the spooky field in Sempringham and telling me his story. And special thanks go out to Dr. Francis Young for his expertise again. And if it wasn't for his tip-off about the Biggleswade Phantom Army, I'd have not seen the story about Sempringham. There's info on the blog about Francis and his many wonderful books and writings. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Emily L. Watts for playing the part of Edith. Thank you to Ollie Campbell for his generosity in letting me play his song, Mon the Burryman. See you all in time for Halloween. And if you can't do without Weird in the Wade for the next couple of months, go back and have a listen to the back catalogue. Those episodes are always there, waiting to be rediscovered. Thank you so much for listening to Weird in the Wade. Weird in the Wade is researched, written, presented and produced by me, Nat Doig. Theme music is by Tess Savagir, and all additional music and sound effects are from Epidemic Sound.